Hello and welcome to Airheads, a not-so-serious look at the serious business of royal rumours, gossip and gowns. I'm Tom.
And I'm Maeve.
And do you want to start with Thatcher, or can we go straight into Camilla?
I don't think anybody cares about Camilla.
I care about Camilla! Morning, noon and night I care about her!
Tom's been practicing that all day.
I love doing these little bits now. It's my new thing.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, that was obviously a huge part for me of the second half of the season of The Crown. We're going to do episodes 5 to 10. We will try not to spoil anything as we go. We're going to do it in chronological order. But it probably would help if you've watched them all. Otherwise, you might get things spoiled.
You can't spoil history, Tom. Especially not history like this.
Absolutely. And we will start off with a bit of a history lesson in itself. The episode entitled Fagin.
The 5th episode of season 4 of The Crown, which is basically what was life like under Margaret Thatcher, if you were a member of the working class.
Yeah, and I thought it was an interesting choice for Peter Morgan, because he took the story of Michael Fagin. This is a true story. He was a painter and decorator who was out of work due to Thatcher's new policies. But he broke into Buckingham Palace twice in 1982, and on the second occasion, he spoke to the Queen in her bedroom.
Yeah, this is like one of those stories where it's so crazy it has to be true. Like, if Peter Morgan had written it, we'd be like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like, that he broke in twice. This sticks pretty closely to his own account of how he broke in, although the conversation is totally made up.
In case you didn't notice that it was exactly like a stage play.
And how amazing it was that he had this sort of prepared presentation to give with all kinds of facts and figures on Thatcher's policies.
So neatly encapsulated. But anyway.
I do like that it is quite stagey, but it's so enjoyable, and you can tell Peter Morgan, the writer and creator of The Crown, really relishes this kind of material, and it is so ripe for drama anyway, because no one knows what happened. Although Michael Fagin did give an interview to The Telegraph recently where he said that they barely spoke. It was like less than 10 minutes that he was in there, and he said, I pulled back the curtain and she said, what are you doing here? And that her voice was a lot less posh and clipped than he had expected. That she talks like me and you, normal. Which I find hard to believe, but that's what he said. And he also said that after a short moment in which he sat on the bed, the Queen told him, I'll be back in a minute, and darted out of the room. She walked out on her little legs. Then a footman comes in and goes, you look like you need a drink, mate. And then he brought him out to get a drink, and then the police came in, and he was saying as well that like the guards that work in the palace are like basically retired and hadn't arrested anyone in years, and that they were like fumbling for their notebook, which also sounds like very ready for TV.
Well, yeah, but I was thinking it also sounds like kind of believable, because how many people try to break into Buckingham Palace? Like, you would imagine that it would be so secure and have all this like state-of-the-art equipment and like all these trained soldiers. So yeah, why not have some kind of bumbling retired guys doing it?
I do think, that would be a lot less exciting television. Yeah. So instead, The Crown uses Michael Fagin's story to show us the toll that Thatcher's policies took on people, and uses him in particular as a mouthpiece for all of the hatred that people felt towards Thatcher at the time. So to set the scene at the start, we get these contrasting images of a Buckingham Palace garden party with all these people dressed in their finery, and then images of Michael Fagin in the dole queue. I
thought it was great when the royals were preparing to enter the garden party, and I think it's Margaret who's like, but no real conversations, right? Like, they know that they're just there to just deliver platitudes and get out as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and the aide says, like, we've prepared some suitable people for you to meet. And Philip's like, gloves on, let's get this over with. Which I can completely believe. I was very interested because some of you guys had written to us to tell us that you are loving Gillian Anderson as Margaret Thatcher. As we said in the last episode, we think this is a crazy performance, or I certainly do.
I mean, and I'm certainly right there with you. I think initially I enjoyed it, and I didn't think it was that bad, but the more I've watched, the more it was so pantomime. And like, we know that Gillian Anderson is so good, but I felt like her like trying to keep on this impression that she had like got in the way of her performance massively.
Your Majesty.
I thought though that this was possibly her best episode because for much of it she's not on screen.
Yeah.
And I thought there was because her voice kind of provides the sort of backdrop for the episode, because you hear her on the radio spouting off about like hard work and resilience and all this kind of stuff. And at one point I was asking you, like, is this the real Thatcher? Because it sounded so much more authentic, because you didn't have the accompanying visual of Gillian Anderson trying to hold her lip in place the whole time.
Yeah. So yeah, you have this backdrop of Thatcher's voice talking about the importance of hard work, and the royals in their palace, and everyone dressed up in their finery to meet the Queen at a garden party. And then you have Michael Fagan trying to get the water damage fixed to his flat so that he can see his kids again. And you get this kind of window into his like very bleak existence as someone who is out of work due to the rising unemployment. His MP then tells him very sarcastically that he could take his concerns up with the Queen, and that's what he decides to do.
Yeah, and I thought we should just say that the actor Tom Brooke, who is playing Michael Fagan, is so good in this episode, because I feel like it's maybe the first episode that's really sort of about somebody other than the Queen. Obviously, it is also about the Queen, but so much of the episode is given over to him. And, you know, he's not the most likable man. He's not like a perfect character, but I just thought he was so engaging, and he's played this kind of character a few times, like in Bodyguard and in Sherlock, but I just thought he was brilliant, and I would love to see some kind of awards recognition for him.
I particularly liked his performance when he goes out on his balcony and he sees everyone celebrating Margaret Thatcher and the end of the Falklands War, because I think when the Falklands War came to an end, that was like the height of Thatcher's popularity, and a lot of people got swept up in that kind of like nationalism, and which is, you know, a very calculated move by Thatcher. That's, you know, why she wanted to wage a war and win a war. But what you had was Michael Fagan looking at that and just seeing this like populism that masks the incredibly detrimental things that she was doing to the country for those very people who were celebrating her. So I thought that was like a really poignant moment.
It was just so brazen, that scene of him breaking into the palace. Like, it was so exciting. And when he sits on the throne, like Kevin Spacey and Ghislaine Maxwell. And when he like takes a bottle of wine and then he runs off when a maid sees him, and then that he breaks in again, because, you know, part of it, this sort of theme running through the episode, is the Queen feeling like increasingly unnerved with Thatcher's power and popularity, and she feels like if she allows Thatcher to introduce more security measures at the palace, that she's going to be basically imprisoned. There's this really laughable moment where she says, Buckingham Palace is too like a prison as it is. But I guess that's how they explain why he was able to break in twice.
And on the second time he comes in, before he arrives, we not only see the Queen brushing her teeth, but also on the loo. Again.
I couldn't believe this. Like, is she on the toilet again? We're going to get 2 scenes of Olivia Colman's Queen on the toilet. And we weren't paying that close attention in the first 2 seasons either, so maybe we got Claire Foy as well.
I don't think we did. I think Claire Foy said, no, my version of the Queen does not use the lavatory. But yeah, when he finally does meet the Queen and says that, you know, he wants her to meet a real normal person, she seems so offended when she says, I meet normal people all the time. And he makes the very, like, well, obvious to us point, but maybe this would slip past the Queen, that everyone she meets is on their best behaviour and that they're bowing and scraping. It's not normal.
I did think this was another example of a quite heavy hand with the dialogue.
Yeah.
Because that was made very obvious to us in those contrasting scenes of the garden party and the dole queue, and like what is a normal person. It's obviously not the fucking person in their fascinator at Buckingham Palace trying to shake hands with the Queen.
Yeah, no matter how much the courtiers are kind of choosing who is a suitable or appropriate person, that's not the same as a normal person.
But this is the crown, so they have to really lay it on, and they do.
Yeah.
Some of the other moments I really liked in their conversation was when he is walking around and sees her toothbrush and makes the exact same comment that I made to you, the richest woman in the world, and not even an electric toothbrush. But that was shocking to me.
But then I also figure that maybe the Queen like considers that like hard work, and that's her duty, is to brush her teeth by hand. But as a painter and decorator by trade, he has a very critical eye over the interiors of Buckingham Palace. He says it's very run down, that the carpets need updating, and that there's cracked paint everywhere, which I thought was funny. And also when the Queen said, "What's the matter with you? This is private property." And he said, "No, it's not. It's state property."
Such a good line. Such a good line.
Like cheers went up from our sofa.
But yeah, then he goes into his like PowerPoint about how Thatcher has dismantled the state and the sense of community and sense of kindness and all this stuff. But the real clincher, I think, comes when he says, "She's got her eye on you too. You'll be out of a job next. She's quietly putting you out of work." And those are the Queen's own fears and concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. In the kind of Queen versus Thatcher fight that this kind of whole season documents, the Queen is very much the leftist, and we see that when the police arrive and the Queen says, "I hope they don't make things too difficult for you" when they take him away, and that she'll bear in mind what he said, as though that would happen after someone breaks into her bedroom.
Yeah, and we do see that later when she speaks with Thatcher, but two lines I just wanted to pull out as the best line of the episode and the worst line of the episode. I thought the best line, or the most hard-hitting line, was when Michael Fagan says, "They say I have mental health problems now. I don't, I'm just poor."
Yeah.
That was really good. The worst line, I thought, was when the Queen is eating with Philip and he is saying, "Oh, this Michael Fagan is a total lunatic and a fool." And the Queen says, "Yes, but in the best sense, like Lear's fool."
So funny. All these just Shakespearean allegories just dripping off her tongue.
But anyway, yes, on to the Queen v Thatcher.
Yeah.
And we see this conversation between them where she is defending Michael Fagan, saying, you know, he's not entirely to blame for his troubles, that he's a victim of unemployment. And she says, "If people like Michael Fagan are struggling, do we not have a collective duty to help them?"
And yeah, I just really don't believe that she would say this about someone who broke into her home. Like, she doesn't have this liberal heart that Peter Morgan seems so keen on, in my view.
Yeah, I feel like the Queen, in the Crown's view, has this like hidden empathy that no other member of her family does, and that she alone is the one who can really relate to people.
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes they play that up and sometimes they show her as being clueless and aloof, but when it suits them, they really do treat her as somebody who is very empathetic in a way that I just find hard to believe.
Yeah, like I totally agree, because it is very selective, and we'll see other moments in the next few episodes where she seems totally incapable of empathy on a personal level or compassion. But yeah, definitely Peter Morgan is not beyond using it as a plot device.
I was very interested in the end of the episode when, after their meeting, Thatcher like runs off and she's on her way to a victory parade for the end of the Falklands War, and the Queen is watching this on TV. She's not at this victory parade, and she says to Philip, "The Prime Minister taking the salute instead of the sovereign, doesn't that bother you?" And he's like, "No, clearly bothers you though." Yeah. And she says that she feels Thatcher is getting ahead of herself.
It is very interesting, I think, that the war is not celebrated by the Queen and like as this British victory, but rather it seems like a personal victory for Margaret Thatcher. And I was doing a bit of reading about it, and it seems like she really did like identify herself so massively with this war as like a key thing about her and about her government. And I can see how that would be very threatening to the Queen.
Yeah, it's really striking to me how much the Queen, in the Crown's view, felt threatened by Thatcher, and that was a problem that we haven't seen her have with any of Thatcher's male predecessors. And I was kind of wondering, like, is this Peter Morgan reducing their dynamic to a cat fight? And in which case, is that very sexist? Or is this a more kind of plausible depiction of how the Queen would be feeling? Because, you know, throughout the 4 seasons so far, we have seen her fending off her sister, her son, her husband, anybody else that wants to take on more responsibility. And she clearly feels like there's only one head bitch in charge here, and it's me.
Yeah.
And when you have another stateswoman type figure rising up of the same generation with so many other similarities between them, she clearly feels like she's putting her own position at risk.
Yeah, especially as, love her or hate her, Margaret Thatcher was like an absolute figurehead, like very much a personality, identifiable in a way that I feel like a lot of the male politicians or prime ministers can like blend into one, or like be kind of a bit weaker in terms of their personality. But like now you have someone who could very easily be pitted against the Queen. I wasn't sure if Peter Morgan's approach to it was sexist, or if the conflict between them came out of the fact that like sexist attitudes pit them against each other.
Yeah,
you know,
of course, it's not like totally black and white.
But I felt like, and we'll get to it, the final scene between them kind of undid maybe some of the respect I had for Peter Morgan's treatment of it. But we'll get to that when we do. For now, shall we move on to episode 6, Terra Nullius?
Oh, lovely, Tom. Yeah, so we do this kind of swapping out where you got a Thatcher episode, then you get a Diana episode, and we see that throughout the season. We're kind of batting between these two formidable opponents as the Crown sees them for the Queen. And this episode obviously is all about Charles and Diana's royal tour of Australia and New Zealand, mainly about the deterioration of their marriage, but also a bit of an insight into the Queen's insecurity.
Yeah, definitely. Because the Queen visited Australia on a tour back in 1954, and she fucking tells anyone who'll listen in this episode about it. And we get that scene where she's watching her old footage.
So weird.
Like a total freak. And then Philip like comes in, and even he's a bit like, what are you doing?
Yeah. I also... we've had this sort of recurring motif of this like Sex and the City style meeting of the ladies, like Queen Mum, Princess Margaret and Princess Anne, and they like catch up, which I guess is like a useful device to get them to share their feelings about things. But it is sort of funny to me, like, who's the Samantha? But
Queen Mum.
I'm a trisexual. I'll try anything once.
They talk amongst themselves anyway about Diana, and when it's mentioned that Diana has been doing things to herself, I thought Olivia Colman's acting was so good in this scene. Like, I thought she did such a good job of showing the Queen like completely unable to process this and like almost just like shutting down as she tries to, or doesn't try to understand what that means.
Yeah, we see like the real limits of her even faux empathy in this.
And it's all on her face. She doesn't even say anything.
But we also get like a very notable silence from Anne when they're discussing the Queen's trip to Australia in 1954. And the Queen is like, well, I went away for 5 months. And that was, that was totally fine. And she can't even fathom the idea that this absence had an effect on her kids. She's obsessed with the fact that the tour was a success. But Anne doesn't say anything.
Yeah. By comparison, then, we see how fierce Diana can be about her kids.
Yeah.
And there's this bit on the airplane where she gives Charles's aide a real dressing down over the idea that they will be separated from Prince William for part of the tour. And that scene really stood out to me because I felt like a lot of the coverage in the very Charles sympathetic sections of the media were saying that Diana was being presented as this perfect, flawless victim and that she had no faults. But I think they're doing something a little bit more complicated than that on The Crown. Like, I felt like this really wasn't shying away from showing that she could be quite difficult. Like, I found it quite awkward and, like, painful to watch her demanding the aide describe Will as a perfect baby.
Yeah. It was painful to watch. I did kind of enjoy his, like, very awkward... I was like, how would I react in this situation? I can't imagine myself ever saying, oh, what a perfect baby you have. Like, I would also be very awkward in that situation.
But she also suffered from postpartum depression, so that there is more to those kind of moments. But I just thought it was worth noting that they are doing something a little bit more complex.
Yeah. And we also got, like, quite an inscrutable look on Charles's face while she was doing that. And, like, I was kind of wondering, is he wishing his own mum had been this fierce in trying to spend time with him, or especially when she's talking about being a present mother to a future king.
Yeah.
And you've got, like, this faraway look in Charles's eye.
They keep him in the shot the whole time.
Yeah.
But he is not at all supportive of Diana when he's on the phone to Camilla and he's calling Diana weak and pathetic because she wants to stay with her son and that she's, like, letting the side down, all this kind of stuff. It's crazy. And, you know, Tom's favourite scene of the show came at the start when we saw Charles and Camilla telling this incredibly crap joke.
Yeah, really
like
bad.
taking it in turns at a party.
And the punchline to it was, you're not really in this for the hunting, are you? And I thought it was so funny that they did this at, like, a hunting party that Charles is hosting. And, like, he's not in it for the hunting either. He's in it so he can spend time with Camilla. So I thought that was, like, a crap joke, but it did do double service.
Or maybe even did triple service, because it, again, underlined for us something that I think has really come across this season is the idea that these people are horrendous company.
Yeah.
And, like, basically unbearable to be around. Like, when we saw them at Balmoral, when we see them at this party, when we see them later in Sandringham, or, like, anytime they have to interact with people that you just think, God, I'd hate to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did get the impression with that scene at Highgrove that the Queen was right, that Charles is surrounding himself with sycophants. If the Balmoral episode showed us how awful they can be to guests who maybe don't really want to be there, this showed us, like, the true hell of what one of these Highgrove parties would be like, with all these fawning people who are just absolutely falling over themselves to laugh at this kind of shit humour.
While he just holds court and presumably does all his impressions that we know he likes to do, and God knows what else. But back to Diana. There's this scene when they go to, like, a sheep farm somewhere in Australia, when Diana insists that she can't be apart from Will any further. And it's there that they have this big blowout and she confronts Charles about his obsession with Camilla and the Fred and Gladys bracelet, that he wore the CC cufflinks on their honeymoon, and that she found a photo of them in his diary and love letters and all sorts of stuff, like, really just shameless.
The list just goes on and on in that scene. I was just kind of like, my jaw just kept dropping and dropping.
And I do think it's to Josh O'Connor and Emma Corrin's credit that this scene was so strong.
Yeah.
Because there was no restraint whatsoever in this dialogue.
Yeah.
At times, it really felt like an ITV drama or something to me. Like, the dramatics were so dramatic. And you had Diana saying, in case you missed it, this is the most important conversation we've ever had. Like, really signposting for us. You have Charles saying, I know what being overlooked feels like better than anyone.
Yeah, the idea that Charles needs any sympathy for this is, like, totally beyond my understanding, but I was surprised that it came as a shock to Diana. I kind of thought it would be kind of obvious. But anyway, they toast to a fresh start where they will give each other all the support and praise that they need. And when Charles goes, how pathetic, but I do need it sometimes. It's like, sometimes, okay, right.
Yeah, round the clock support. It's a full-time job.
Yeah.
For this guy. I did really like the way they did this, that it doesn't feel like a romantic moment or like it's grounded in reality, that you really get the sense that this is what they want to believe, and this is a shared delusion for them, that they can find their way back to each other. And I think Emma Corrin in particular does such a good job of showing this very hopeful, optimistic happiness in Diana. But for us, we can tell, like, this is totally empty. These promises are so hollow.
Yeah.
And because we all know what happens, there is this shadow, this air of doom hanging over all of the supposedly, like, loved up moments that we see after this.
Yeah, and I think even right at that moment when they're making all these promises to each other, you just know how it's all so one way for Charles. He is, like, agreeing to all this love and support because he's just thinking about it flowing towards him and him getting all the validation that he craves.
I think he's happy as long as people want and love them as a package. But as we see as the episode goes on, when people start to go mad for Diana singular, it becomes a totally different story, and you can see the sort of resentment dawning on his face.
Yeah, and that he does that plastered on smile really well. It becomes very apparent in this season that he's very good at doing Charles pretending to be happy, but secretly brewing up an absolute shitstorm for later.
The scaffolding of a smile, isn't that how he puts it?
Yeah. I really liked when he says, "I love you" to Diana, and she goes, "Gosh."
Oh my god, I'm just waiting for somebody to do a supercut of every time Emma Corrin says "gosh" as Diana. It's so good.
Really, really good.
My favourite fashion moment of this episode was Diana in the metallic blue ruffled dress at the big gala they go to. Oh my god, it was so gorgeous.
Yeah.
But I found it so on the nose that they were dancing to Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, Can't Take My Eyes Off You. The, like, "You're just too good to be true." It was like sirens. There's so many on the nose music choices in this show. I think we've mentioned a few of them on the last episode, but like the Girls on Film one,
yeah,
and then later we got New York, New York when she's in New York,
and then they accompany it with that very like heavy-handed visual of like freezing it as Diana spins out on Charles's arm. Like, is she being flung out of the family? Is she trying to break free from Charles's grip?
I actually loved that though. I thought that was a great shot.
I mean, it was very beautiful, but it was also like the symbolism was screaming. I was disappointed we didn't get to see them sleep together after.
I don't think we see them kiss this season, right?
No, because we definitely see Charles and Camilla kiss, spoiler alert. But and we see the Queen on the toilet twice. But we don't see Charles and Diana have sex.
Or kiss, because I was looking at some of the images and there was an image of them like about to kiss from like one of the stills from the season, but that kiss never came to fruition on the screen.
Shame.
But anyway, at this point, things are going so well that Charles doesn't even want to take Camilla's calls.
I know. And we were meant to see that as a moment of great personal growth and sacrifice and happiness for Charles.
I felt like that moment seemed, or just this general period of the episode seemed to me to be sort of leaning on the trope of like an addict, like going clean.
Yeah.
And that there's this sort of honeymoon period where everything's going really well.
Yeah, and he can kind of keep patting himself on the back that he's like staying off the drug that is Camilla Parker Bowles.
But he's hooked.
That CPB oil. But we see that Diana is a lot more confident in this happy period, like understandably. The tour had started with this like really disastrous press conference where she like didn't really know what she was saying, didn't know where they were going. She kept looking to Charles for either prompts or for kind of assurance. But now she's doing radio interviews where she's absolutely dominating. I did like that we get the start of this kind of personal branding that just seemed so Diana to me when she says, I don't think of myself as royalty. First of all, I'm a wife and a mother.
You've really been working on this accent, haven't you? Wow.
I take my job very seriously.
But obviously people are loving it.
Yeah.
And I thought they really did the crowd scenes so well. And you felt like the noise and just the overwhelmingness of how many people there were. Because the episode had started with the Australian Prime Ministerial candidate and eventual Prime Minister, Bob Hawke, saying that Charles and Diana's visit may be a sort of turning point for Australia to throw off the shackles of the monarchy. And in the cold open, he's saying, you know, we're past that, we're more mature. But Diana really puts paid to any hopes of becoming a republic, though.
Yeah, the crowd's just, again, bigger and bigger and, like, more invasive and overpowering.
Yeah, that one scene where it starts with all the people in the pool and looking down, and then you go like down all the levels and there's just so many people looking at her.
Yeah.
And then this mob sort of traps her in a ring, and it just feels frightening almost.
Yeah, I mean, like, especially knowing the story, you know, I feel like a lot of stuff in this episode, like, Peter Morgan was able to rely on just the amount of knowledge everyone has of Diana.
Yeah, that sense of pressure mounting really comes across, and the feeling of public ownership that people are starting to feel about her, and as well as that Charles's jealousy comes across really strong in that scene. But I loved the scene of the Queen and Princess Anne talking about it, and you can tell the Queen is like fuming, like silently just seething with envy at this, when Anne is kind of teasing her, saying like, well, the crowds are actually bigger for Diana than they were for you on that tour you won't shut the fuck up about. And Queen's like, I very much doubt it.
I thought it was so good because it did strike me as like how a kid might tease their parents.
The Queen tries to sort of dump on Diana, saying like, oh, I've heard she's hysterical. She's clinging to that baby like a life raft, as if it's a criticism.
Yeah. And I like then when Anne points out that, like, that's actually not a drawback. That's what the people love about her.
Yeah, that's just something the Queen doesn't seem to understand at all.
She's so touchy about parenting in this season, like, throughout, I think. But Anne seems to be the only one with any foresight here. She can see it's going to be a big problem for Charles because of all the, like, constant reassurance and attention that he needs. And I thought they played it out really well, like, physically, in that scene where it kind of cuts between Charles playing polo and falling off his horse and people laughing at him, with Diana, like, having a flirty photo shoot with all those swimmers, one of whom is holding a big plaque and looks like he's naked. It was very funny.
I just love Josh O'Connor as Charles, and I think he's done such a wonderful job of very subtly twisting the Charles that we saw last season into the Charles of this season. And, you know, I'm thinking particularly about that episode last season where he's in Wales when he's studying and none of the other students have any interest in him, and he's like so out of place and so awkward, and you feel really sorry for him. But the way that has developed, and how much he feels sorry for himself and feels underappreciated and left out and excluded despite being, you know, the most privileged man on earth, how that has evolved into him being this totally intolerable person, and the way that he treats his wife is really rooted in that. Yeah,
because I suppose, like, part of the sympathy that you have for, like, him in that season is like, oh, he's going through all this, surely he'll come out of it with, like, some sense of what treating someone badly can do to them. But it seems like in this portrayal of him that it's like a cycle of abuse almost that he then keeps going, because the way he refuses to support his wife, the way he can't seem to show much affection to his kids. Like, it's all just playing out again, the stuff that we spent last season being so sorry about.
But I think as well, because he laid that foundation, you do still have some sympathy for him. Like, he's not like a cartoon villain.
No.
You can see where it's coming from. So you do remember him at Gordonstoun and his mom shaking his hand when he was a little kid, and all those bits have been building up to this.
Yeah.
So I think that is a very effective way of telling this story, so there's more nuance to it. Like, I particularly liked the contrast of the two scenes where they're arriving at events, and at the first one it's some gala, and Diana very confidently gets out of the car and goes first, and she goes with the red carpet. And, you know, as we talk about all the time with Kate and Will and Harry and Meghan, there's all this stuff about like what happens when the wife goes first, and you know, people get very worked up about that, and we see Charles getting very worked up about that,
even though it's one of the things that they raise in that big argument that they have when she's like, you always go first, I want to go first for once. Like, he's meant to have like had this discussion and come to terms with it and come to realize what his wife wants. But in that moment where he's looking up the stairs at her when she goes in, you can just kind of tell that he hasn't taken any of that on board, really.
And then the next time we see them entering the Prime Minister's residence, he's the one that's going first, and she's very tentative, like looking at him to see, oh God, what's his mood today?
Yeah, I thought that was an incredible performance by Emma Corrin, because it really did speak to her as somebody who was in a relationship where she's like having to basically test the mood of their partner at all times to see like what's going to happen next. Is he going to go off on one? Like, I really thought the fear and apprehension in her eyes came across so strongly in that very short little scene.
Yeah, and then at that meeting with the Prime Minister, he's saying that he hoped the tour would have inspired people to want to break free from the monarchy, and maybe if Charles had come on his own, that would have happened. I just loved how he like sort of laughs in Charles's face when he says that.
That was
so
amazing.
funny. But because of Diana, he says that the power of fairy tales that Diana brings, that superstar may have just set back the cause of republicanism in Australia for the foreseeable future.
I thought that was such a good line. Like, it was a good angle to have on it, this whole kind of subplot with like wanting to free Australia from the rule of the monarchy, and Diana's success meaning that so many people would have to keep in that kind of oppressive system.
And it's a reminder that Diana was such an asset for this family, and they didn't appreciate her value. She was the one that made the monarchy relevant to a new generation, people of different backgrounds, different races, different ages. Like, she had such appeal, and they didn't know how to harness it. We've got to talk about the scene when they go back home and Diana and the Queen.
Yes, so after Charles and Diana have pointedly gone their separate ways in separate cars, Diana asks to meet the Queen, and we get this kind of recurring bit in this season of Diana calling the Queen Mama.
Not the mama.
The Queen is very surprised when she says this, despite the fact Diana mentions, you did tell me to always call you that.
Just this whole scene, I was like looking like through my fingers. It was so excruciating. Yeah. So you have Diana telling the Queen that Charles really resents all the attention that she's getting, and she's hoping the Queen can tell her why, but the Queen takes this so personally, takes it as like a personal slight and a comment on her own mothering, and she really goes at Diana, and she's saying like, isn't it possible there's a part of you that's enjoying your success a bit too much? And she accuses Diana of overstepping the mark and playing to the gallery, and you can totally see her own insecurities in that. Despite Diana saying that, you know, Charles and the Queen all seem to resent her, she says all she wants is to play for the team, and the Queen's the captain of the team, so if she shows Diana love, then everyone else is going to fall in line. But the Queen's like, hello, ringing the bell, trying to kick her out.
I know, and then that final hug.
Oh my God.
I've never seen a more awkward hug.
What an exquisite moment. That agonizing.
Olivia Colman's hands, like,
flailing on the side. Such a good scene. Which then I felt was rather undercut by another one of these Sex and the City gal pal meetups, when she is revealing that hidden empathy once again and saying, is it possible that she has a point? Perhaps Diana is best placed to connect with the people, which just rings very false to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so heavy-handed and so unbelievable that it undermines that scene with Diana and the Queen, which was very awkward and, you know, it wasn't like incredibly subtle, but it was very powerful. I thought that scene with Diana and the Queen.
And it just felt like this one, that the one where they're saying Diana will need to bend, and if she doesn't bend, she will break. That just felt like a scene for the trailer. Like, yeah. And it wasn't the trailer. It was just too much, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Helena Bonham Carter was pretty much in this season to deliver lines for the trailer. But they did give her own episode, which we'll get onto now. Which
was definitely the weakest episode.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. So this is the episode where she discovers the existence of cousins who were born with developmental disorders and were then locked away in an institution and were declared dead while they were still alive.
And I am very interested, and we talk a lot on this podcast about the roles of the heir and the spare and that kind of dynamic, and this one very much played into that because we had Margaret once again looking for purpose and finding less of it as she gets older, and we see Edward's 21st birthday, amazing, that's such an amazing scene, where she is knocked further down the line of succession and she loses one of her last big gigs as a councillor of state, and she's feeling jealous of Diana. Everybody wants Diana instead because she's younger, she's prettier, but this is stuff that we have seen every season now.
Yeah.
With Margaret and with Philip and with Charles. So I felt like it was a little bit repetitive and I just couldn't get into this story.
No, I mean, I think it's probably an interesting story. It's like the kind of thing that maybe you'd watch like a documentary about. Like, you know, the idea of the royal family hiding something like this and treating the family badly. Like, you want to know about that. But it's all tied up in this Margaret stuff because they needed to give her something to do. And I guess the best thing about it was we got to go to Mystique and see the like glamorous pool and loads of caftans.
I do think it is a useful reminder of the very frustrating position that is being the spare, and that you don't have a clear or defined role, and we see that now. We talk about that a lot with Prince Andrew. I would imagine that's going to come into play in a big way in the next couple of seasons with Andrew and Charles, and we talk about it as well with Harry. So I do think that is always relevant, but I was bored by this episode. Much as I love Tom Burke, who was playing her dazzling gay priest friend.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed him, you should watch The Souvenir, which is a great movie with him in it.
Especially if you like Josh O'Connor being like a horrible husband or a horrible partner, then that film will be really good as well. What I thought was really weird was that... So Margaret goes to therapy in this episode, and she's like, the very idea of therapy is against everything I've been brought up to believe, and is so like hostile towards her therapist, who's played by Gemma Jones, which is great.
Gemma Jones, one of the best actresses, who gets dumped in this crappy role.
Yeah, really thankless role. But Margaret goes from that kind of character to someone who's like taking real offence when the Queen Mum describes these cousins as imbeciles.
Yeah, that was implausible to me.
And like this sudden swing towards her being like really progressive and like wanting to use all the proper respectful terminology just rang really hollow with the rest of the character.
I really felt like the scene on the beach with the Queen Mum was a crazy scene, and the acting in that was yikes.
Yeah.
Because the Queen Mum is saying, you know, it all comes back to the abdication, and they talk about the abdication so much in this show, and maybe they do in real life as well. But the Queen Mum's explanation is that because of the abdication, any developmental disorders present in an aristocratic line would become a threat to the very fabric of Britain.
Yeah, she says the hereditary principle, the name of the episode, already hangs by such a precarious thread. Throw in mental illness and it's over. The idea that one family automatically has the right to the throne is already so hard to justify. The gene pool of that family must have 100% purity.
So gross.
Just horrible. Like, what? Just words like purity. You just want to, like, close your ears and,
I know.
like, hide forever. But, yeah, like, the treatment of these people is obviously horrible. The reasoning behind it is horrible. And I was just left roaring, abolish the monarchy.
Yeah, because I find that so interesting. You know, we talk a lot of, when we talk about the Crown, that we feel like it is an essentially monarchist show.
Yeah.
But because so much of the stuff that was happening at the time, and so much of the stuff that was happening always with these people, is indefensible and reprehensible, and how do you navigate that as a monarchist, which we're presuming Peter Morgan is?
Yeah.
And how does he reckon with that, and jumping between the Queen as a very empathetic softie who just wants to connect with people, yeah, and with her being this cold, detached, clueless person. And we kind of see that in the next episode, I think, which is all about another clash between the Queen and Thatcher about imposing sanctions on South Africa in regards to apartheid.
Yeah, and we got a little guest star from Sight for Sore Eyes, Claire Foy. We flash back to 21-year-old Queen Elizabeth pledging her life of duty to the people, and we also see a young Thatcher swirling some blue liquid around beakers and being very scientific at Oxford. So this episode is all about the Queen wanting Thatcher to join with the other Commonwealth nations in imposing sanctions on South Africa, which is in the grip of apartheid. And it's like real Queen is a lefty fan fiction, this episode. We have lines like her wanting to take the perspective of black South Africans, which is just like so out of my like wheelhouse in terms of being able to imagine that. I didn't know where to look.
I know, because this episode opens with, I think, a black person is the first person you see.
Oh yeah, like scrolls through Empire or something, doesn't it? Or like the Commonwealth. It was a very weird open.
It's like, oh my god, non-white people in the Crown.
Yeah.
This never happens. Not that they have an awful lot to work with anyway in that regard. But Thatcher is so uninterested in this proposal, and she really sets out the core beliefs of Thatcherism, that there should be no charity, that people are too willing to blame others for their own problems, how important it is to be independent, and for that reason the whole idea of the Commonwealth is loathsome to her.
She does point out that like the Queen's attachment to Commonwealth is so rooted in like the dwindling empire,
yeah,
like the fact that, you know, the Queen's family no longer presides over this extensive empire, but that now the Queen has rebranded it as like a family and she needs to keep the family together. And Thatcher is really opposed to this idea of like, I guess, people leaning on each other, she would see it as. And we see in this episode that like famous like stubbornness and her refusal to cooperate with 48 other countries. I thought it was interesting that, like, when she's talking to the Queen, she really emphasises that, like, her rise is all due to hard work and not at all like people being handed titles by their parents. And then it's really undermined later in the episode by the fact that she reveals that her son Mark, who we last saw lost in the desert, is now a businessman who has dealings in South Africa. So kind of economic sanctions on South Africa would have like a bad effect on the amount of money he could make. So while she can't pass down titles, she's not going to be able to make him, you know, a duke. She can protect his financial interests.
Once they get back to the UK from the Commonwealth Summit, and we've seen Thatcher saying she's no intention of following what they eventually agree to, the economic signals,
yeah,
the Queen decides that she has to let people know that she is not happy about this. and she decides that they need to leak to the press that she's concerned about Thatcher's lack of compassion, that she wants it to be public knowledge that there is an unprecedented rift between sovereign and prime minister, despite her press secretary, Michael Shea, saying this is a fucking bad idea.
Yeah, and unprecedented.
So that kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about the Queen feeling threatened by another woman in power. We then see the splash on the Sunday Times, Queen dismayed by uncaring Thatcher. We see everyone reading the paper. We see Andrew having breakfast naked with his robe on.
While Charles is in like a full double-breasted suit.
But you were really into Thatcher's breakfast.
I loved that they showed her having breakfast and she was eating a grapefruit, and it was like, let's just make her eat something really sour and bitter and horrible, just like she is.
But I could kind of see where Thatcher was coming from then when they meet again for their audience, and she's saying, you know, we've had 164 of these audiences, and yet you go behind my back. You've broken the unbreakable code of silence between sovereign and prime minister. And the Queen is straight up lying to her, being like, well, I always tell people don't read the papers. They just misquote, they misunderstand. But she's busted here.
There's more examples of her, like, cowardice, actually, when it comes down to it. Like in the way that she couldn't tell Margaret herself that she wasn't going to be Councillor of State anymore. She brought a flunky to do it.
Yeah.
She tried to hide all this in the actions of Michael Shea, and obviously ends up blaming him, and he has to resign. And we get that clip of the Queen watching from her window as he, like, awkwardly tries to get into a cab with his cardboard box.
Yeah, and I just felt like that was a very intriguing way of looking at the Queen's compassion, because that's obviously what she's accusing Thatcher of lacking.
Yeah.
Whereas in this instance, we're seeing her being really brutal, like ruthless with the people around her. Like, she'll fuck anyone over, is what I got, my takeaway from this exchange. But this was not the only little rift we saw in this episode, because we had the return of Prince Andrew.
So good. We get the first mention of Charles's slimmed down monarchy, and Andrew is not happy about it. He's chatting to the Queen and claiming that Charles is just saying all this stuff because he's jealous of him and his closeness to his mummy, and the fact that I fought in a real war, won real medals, I'm happier in love than him.
And that he thinks he'd be better at being the heir.
So fun. Like, just exactly what you expect from someone of Andrew's, like, arrogance and general disposition.
And pettiness, because he decides the way to show Charles up is by asking Prince Edward to be his best man for his wedding to Ms. Sarah Ferguson.
So happy to see Fergie, even if it was just for the briefest of moments. But the actress playing her really got her, like, manic energy down really well.
The hair was perfect. The outfit was so good. I thought she was great. I thought it was such a pity that she had 0 lines this season.
Yeah.
And I'm desperately hoping that she becomes a big part of next season. Please, please, please. We did see the one moment of the Queen looking down, sort of skeptically, at Fergie down the stairs. Obviously looking down on her.
Oh, in more ways than one. Oh, Peter Morgan, I see what you're doing here. Oh my God.
But all this coverage of the Queen's feud with Thatcher is overshadowing Andrew's wedding.
Oh, he's so pissed off about it.
This incredible scene, another, like, series highlight for me, when you had all 4 of the kids in the palace the day of Andrew's wedding, and Andrew is fucking pissed off that it's not him, and Fergie all over the newspapers, and he's complaining, and Charles actually seems, like, delighted that the Queen is getting such a rough go of it for expressing an opinion, when he's sort of smirking to himself and saying, oh, she's getting slaughtered for it.
I know,
So
it was
good.
so good. And it was, like, such a good combination of, like, actually maybe being a little bit proud of her for saying something, but yeah, that absolute ruthless delight in his eyes was great.
Also, totally loved the bit where Charles is saying, like, why would anybody care about the wedding of a fringe member of the family who'll never be king? That was excellent.
Like, you got the feeling there that, like, Andrew would kill him and anybody who stood in his way. Did you like when Edward said, that was impressively cunty?
That felt so true to life. I would imagine that that word is a frequent utterance in the royal households.
Absolutely.
Much as I enjoyed Charles upbraiding Andrew in this episode, I found the next two episodes, quite hard to stomach, because it gets into the real collapse of Charles and Diana's marriage. In episode 9, which is called Avalanche, Charles gets caught in an avalanche and is almost killed, and Charles and Diana take very different things from this incident, where Charles is driven to end the marriage immediately, but Diana really wants to try again.
We begin the episode, though, the opening of it, with this absolutely disastrous gift from Diana to Charles for his birthday. She gets up on stage at the theatre and dances to Uptown Girl.
Oh my god. I never knew about this. I think this is sensational.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell was she thinking? Both of her gifts in this episode, I can see how people might think they're sweet and thoughtful, but I'm like, how clueless can you be that you think he is going to enjoy this?
Yeah, and I mean, I think this does play into a portrayal of Diana that isn't 100% this perfect angel, because she admits herself she likes to perform, she likes when people are looking at her, and yes, she says like that's when she can communicate best with people and that's what she likes to do. But both of these gifts, both the performed on stage and the videotape that she gives, she's way more into it than Charles is, and I kind of feel like that's always the case. She's maybe kidded herself that he might enjoy them too.
Yeah, he is really nasty afterwards, though.
Absolutely.
When he's saying 8 minutes they were on their feet cheering for you, and he's just raging about it, and it's so hard to watch.
Yeah, I mean, nothing that she did warranted that kind of like abusive language from him, and like that reaction, like you say, it was hard to watch.
We did get a little reminder of Philip's transgressions when we see the Queen and Philip talking about the performance, Diana's performance the next day, and he's like, why didn't you ever dance for me on my birthday? And she says, if memory serves, you had your own ballerinas for that.
Very good.
It's just come in useful later in the episode, though. Remember what she had to put up with?
Yeah. Were you charmed by the Queen who doesn't know who Billy Joel is?
I've never heard of Uptown Girl. What a life.
But yeah, as usual, it's left to Anne to kind of update the Queen on what's really going on. She kind of has to talk to her about how Charles and Diana's marriage is like a rare example of something that is actually worse than the newspapers report, and that it's basically over. So the Queen has this great idea to summon them both to a meeting with her, and she gives her own brand of marital advice.
Which is just, the marriage cannot be allowed to fail.
Yeah, get your shit together. I put up with loads of infidelity from Philip, so you better pull yourself together.
Yeah, and she's like, do you understand what it takes? The blind eyes that must be turned, the compromises that must be made, with like some helpful side eye from Philip. Like, remember what happened between them two? But I was struck by the fact that Diana is the one who's keen to make it work. Charles has this like speech he's prepared that they don't let him read out, but it's Diana that the Queen calls out for breaking her vows. So unsurprising that she would think it is the woman's duty to just put up with the straying man.
Yeah, it's like excusable in the man, but absolutely beyond the pale for the woman.
It was in this episode that I sort of noticed how much her look had come along since the first episode of the season, when obviously back then when we saw her, well, when she was in that leaf pixie costume or whatever, but in the dungarees and stuff, and now she has that very heavy eyeliner on and the frosted lipstick, and her hair is much more done, and there's a lot more tailoring and kind of smart glam clothes. Like, the outfits in this episode are so good. I love that black and yellow floral dress she wears for this meeting with the Queen, and the stunning one shoulder floral dress when she goes to the Savoy.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that was just amazing. There was the blazer with the pink shirt and the jeans when she drives to Highgrove. That felt like a really classic Diana look to me. And then there were the like houndstooth skirt suits, the black and white one with the sort of asymmetric closure. I just thought they really brought Diana to life even more. It was like, obviously Emma Corrin is so young looking, but it sort of told of the passage of time.
But yeah, Diana vows to end all her affairs. She's going to be what the Queen sees as the good wife. And she tells her staff that Major Hewitt is gone. They're not allowed to take any calls from him. Her doors are firmly shut. But Charles has all his spies in her household. So he's like, absolutely can't wait for her to fuck up so that he can tell Mummy, presumably.
Yeah, and there is this just excruciating scene where Charles and his aide are going through his calendar. He's trying to find time for a weekend with Mrs. Parker Bowles, and the aide has to remind him, oh, that's actually your wedding anniversary. And when he says Diana has something planned, Charles looks so horrified. And this just like, the agony is intensified by these scenes of Charles' staff at Highgrove having to swap out the framed pictures by his bed, where he has all these framed photos of Camilla, and then they have to put in the pictures of his kids instead, and Diana, and take Camilla's lingerie out of the bed.
Yeah, when they were
that was very sordid, wasn't it, Tom?
Yeah, that was a lot, I thought.
That was a particularly unflattering scene for Charles, but Diana seemed to be very optimistic. And we heard her saying, like, for the first time, things feel different and I feel different. And when she arrives, there's pink roses everywhere and she's delighted. But then again, you have that difference between them when she's playing with the kids in the pool and he's just kind of sitting by the pool, sort of looking uncomfortable.
Yeah. And he kind of looks pleased, but he doesn't look happy, if you know what I mean. Like, he's like, this is kind of, I suppose, what my life should be like, but I really wish Camilla was here.
And then we get the just superb gift exchange scene.
Oh, yeah. I don't think any two gifts have ever really demonstrated how ill-suited a couple are. So he gives her this old book about the history of her family home, which I'm pretty sure he says is Althorpe, but we've been pulled up by listeners before for not pronouncing it Althorpe, whatever it was.
Yes, our 1-star reviews will disagree.
Yeah, but maybe you should go leave them for The Crown instead.
So she gets this book. She gives him a VHS tape. This thing blew my mind. A video of her on the West End stage performing a number from Phantom of the Opera in full costume with a whole fucking orchestra on the set. It was incredible. Phantom of the Opera, a musical that I hate, Tom loves.
So funny. And I guess that love and hate was played out on Charles and Diana's faces, because she was delighted with her performance and he looked like there was nothing more painful for him.
That scene was one of my favourites of the whole show.
Yeah. From
Charles trying to work the remote control for the TV. Amazing. Amazing comic moment. His reaction, the way he's watching Diana watch the tape, the expression on her face, she's so enamoured by herself. this reminder, like you were saying, this isn't a totally selfless gift.
Yeah.
And then you cut immediately to Charles talking to Anne saying it was monstrous, awful. I thought the agony she inflicted on me at the opera couldn't be topped. And I know that is so brutal and unkind, but it was so funny to me.
Yeah.
But then it's obviously up to Anne, again, the truth teller, to share with Charles exactly what he doesn't want to hear, which is that the marriage between Camilla and Andrew Parker Bowles is a happy and a long marriage. Even if Camilla has feelings for Charles, it's not quite the great Romeo and Juliet you expect.
We get a typically selfish reaction from Charles, who obviously sees himself as a victim because he's not getting all the platitudes that he wants, and he says, "What does one have to do to get some kindness in this family?" Which is another great trailer-worthy line.
Another great impression from Tom. I loved the scene with Charles and Camilla in the car. I thought this was such an illuminating scene because we've heard, I think it's in the Diana Chronicles, the Tina Brown book, that Camilla is the love of Charles's life, but Andrew Parker Bowles is the love of Camilla's life.
Yeah.
And that as much as she enjoyed having an affair with Charles, that she was not ready to be his wife. And she was quite happy with the arrangement that they had. And in the car, in The Crown, he asks her if she has special feelings for Andrew, her husband. And she says, "Andrew has never adored me like you do. He doesn't need me like you do." And that is an answer to a very different question than the one she's been asked. It's very careful wording, I think.
Very carefully worded, and it does show us how exhausting being with Charles must be.
No wonder she keeps her own house so she can fuck off every so often.
And it does make me think that, like, you know, this grown-up little nanny's boy, this is the kind of thing where he, like, wants somebody who's gonna mother him, have his every need kind of preempted and catered for, and someone whose job is to pay attention to him. And I mean, I'm surprised Camilla ever got to the point where she was prepared to do that, because I just feel like it sounds, like I said, exhausting.
I did think this was a surprisingly subtle moment. You know, we're always ragging on how heavy-handed the dialogue can be on this show, but I thought that was a nice moment, and he interprets this the wrong way, and he thinks Camilla is saying that she feels the same way as him, but obviously need is not the same as love.
Yeah.
And when he's asking if she'll leave her husband, she gives this kind of non-committal shrug, and she won't promise to leave her family. She's saying, "Remain realistic, sir." But he's hopeless, isn't he?
Yeah, and things just continue to fall apart from there.
This was so dramatic. The ending of this episode with the literal men in grey suits reporting back on Diana's resuming her affair with James Hewitt to Charles. And the shadowy dawn, they're watching from the arches of the palace and then driving up to Highgrove.
Yeah.
And the music was so cinematic. But anyway, this brings us into the final episode.
War.
Neat little title there.
Yeah. What is the war here? What are the wars that are going on? The main obvious one, I suppose, is the war that's going on kind of between the Queen and Thatcher, but also between Thatcher and the rest of her political party. To kind of summarise it quickly, Thatcher gets ousted from her political party. A longtime colleague resigns and gives this, like, blistering resignation speech, which is probably really cutting if you know anything about cricket.
Although we see Thatcher being ousted here, Thatcherism changes the face of British politics up to today. And there are some things like the unemployment rate that dropped, but Thatcher's Euroscepticism and her willingness to engage with the far right have had a very far-reaching effect that it's still being felt today.
Yeah, like you can see it in like everything that happened with Brexit. But the Queen still gives her the Order of Merit after she steps down as Prime Minister. And, you know, in this episode, the Queen basically says, like, you've had a hugely profound effect on the country. It's different from when you started, but doesn't go into whether or not that change has been good or bad, or whether the country is better or worse. And it did seem weird to me that after peddling this version of the Queen, who is seemingly in opposition to everything Thatcher wants to do in this season, Peter Morgan needed to like wrap it up kind of quickly and neatly by saying at the end, oh, well, they're both women and they both had to put up with kind of strong resistance, so actually they got on in the end.
Yeah, and you have this moment where the Queen invites her to the palace one last time, and she says that she was shocked by how she was forced out. She says, I wanted to offer you my sympathy, not just as Queen to Prime Minister, but woman to woman.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was such a sort of saccharine, like sentimental moment. This bit where she says, you know, usually we give you the Order of Merit in a box, but I'd like to pin this on myself. And it just felt too sugary for me.
Yeah, I agree. And especially with these two women who have absolutely no interest in helping other women ever in any kind of official capacity, to suddenly be like bonding over this seemed like really disrespectful, I thought.
It just felt like a sort of reductive way of handling this, you know, what we had talked about earlier as a cat fight.
Yeah.
And be like, oh, and now they like kiss and make up at the end.
Yeah.
Because that's what gals do. That's the soft femininity that is so innate to all women.
And especially mothers.
But listen, I was glad to see the back of Gillian Anderson's Thatcher.
Yeah, except maybe it's less seeing the back of her as rather her curtsying off screen forever. But let's move on to like a perhaps more like interesting war, which is the war of Diana versus the royal family.
Because in this episode we see Diana preparing for her first solo tour to New York, and she is very nervous about going on her own. And I was shocked by how they show the palace team really working to hold her back, and you have Charles's staff trying to cut back her itinerary, and there's this sort of ominous suggestion that if her schedule is too busy, it would be a risk to her health, her mental health. But even she herself feels that she's being gaslit, and we see her telling her staff of Charles, like, he just hates me and wants me to fail. He tells everyone I'm mad. They treat me like I'm mad, and I'm starting to feel mad.
Yeah, and I felt like if before you had kind of Diana wanting to make the marriage work and be part of a team, perhaps out of a feeling of like not being good enough on her own as like a solo player, this trip to New York confirms to her that she doesn't need them. She's like a total success. Everyone in New York loves her. Her outfits are incredible. And she comes back from it so much stronger, like as a person, I think, with so much more self-belief.
Just on an aside to mention those outfits, one thing that is like frustrating to me is how little screen time all these incredible outfits get. I hope they do some kind of exhibition or something that we can go to, because there are so many I love. Like in this one, the pink and red dress at the meeting at the palace is so fabulous. Loved the red tartan double-breasted coat she wears getting off the plane, the beaded silver gown with the matching little crop jacket at that gala in New York, the houndstooth skirt suit, the colourful one with the green and pink.
Oh, so good.
So cool. And so much more grown up than the ones at the start of the season. Like I was saying, they really do the work of showing how much she's grown into her role. But I do think when you're saying she comes back so much stronger, I don't know if I totally agree. Like, I feel like she looks very uncomfortable. We see her being very startled by all the cameras flashing and all the crowd screaming. That she seems very lonely at the dinner. She's kind of looking around her like she clearly feels very lonely.
Yeah. I think I probably got it wrong by saying that she comes back stronger, because I'm not saying that this trip kind of cures anything or kind of makes any problems go away. But I do think that when we get to that like final conversation she has with Philip and her resolution to strike out away from the family, that maybe going on this trip where she is beloved just herself kind of plays a part in feeling she's able to do that.
The big moment from the trip is her visit to a hospital in Harlem where she meets child AIDS patients. And on the way there in the car, the show really hammers home how beloved Diana is by people of all ages and races and backgrounds. And you see, like, the young people on the basketball court and then all the kids looking out the windows of the school. So much diversity. It really grabs you because we really just see so much whiteness on this show.
Especially, like, if you contrast that with that queue of people at the garden party waiting to meet the Queen, where it's, like, all just, like, very posh white people in their, like, gloves and floral hats.
And for context, we have this reporter pointing out that this hospital is on the wrong side of Harlem, that it's one that very few politicians would visit. But when Diana's there, she learns about the stigma and fear of AIDS, and we see her hugging a little boy in the hospital. And then back home, we see the royals just like driven mad with jealousy.
Yeah.
Like Charles is watching a TV reporter saying Diana is hitting new heights without her husband. And there's one black guy on the TV who says, if they don't want her there, we'd love her here.
So good. Within the kind of Diana versus the royal family war, we get also the pitting of Diana against Camilla, or rather the foreshadowing of this kind of trial by press of Diana versus Camilla. So Charles is talking to Camilla, who can see the writing on the wall, and she begs Charles not to leave her because she knows she'll just be humiliated. And she says, if you put me in a popularity contest with her, I will lose.
Yeah, and she says, like, she'll always defeat me in the court of public opinion. Even though Charles calls her his one true love, she knows that for everyone, and, like, even still today, she'll always be the mistress.
I thought it was so funny when she dropped in that, like, Wikipedia entry about her, like, great-grandmother who was also a mistress to the Prince of Wales. I was like, this is so stupid.
Info dump. Okay, the other war, the War of the Waleses.
Oh, yeah.
Part 1, or the prologue. Charles and Diana, we see them going to a match at Will's school, arriving in separate cars before being driven to the school together. And Diana getting really into the match. She's cheering on the other kids. She gets on with the other mothers. Charles looks totally out of place. And when they're leaving, and she gives Will the hug, and Charles just pats Will on the shoulder.
Yeah. Ooh. And, like, you're just reminded of when the Queen, like, shook his little hand.
Yeah, when she came back from the tour.
Yeah.
The big blazing row that the whole season has been building up to comes when Diana gets back from New York and Charles comes to the palace. Diana is expecting an apology or a pat on the back, but instead he just unleashes this acid on her, this absolute onslaught where he's saying, your capacity for self-delusion never ceases to amaze me. He goes on about the exquisite selfishness of her motives. When he's talking about the AIDS patient, he accuses her of grandstanding. It is a lot.
Yeah, and if you feel like you have any sympathy left for Charles at this point, I feel like this tirade really kind of did it for me, that, like, this man is so beyond being able to get any perspective on this. Like, this is exactly what they discussed in that conversation on the Australia tour, that, like, you need to congratulate someone when they've done something well.
Yeah.
That you need to encourage them. And he is incapable of doing it.
Yeah.
But it's a very dramatic scene.
Including the moment that Tom said at the start.
That I've already performed for you.
But I did think it sort of came back to this idea that the marriage of Charles and Diana was an arranged marriage, and Diana is the only one that wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
And when he says to her, I refuse to be blamed any longer for this grotesque misalliance, he tells her if she has any complaints, she can take it up with the people who arranged it.
And it's very true. It's like, we've all seen that, but it does kind of strike you as just how cruel it is not to make sure every party is aware of what's going on right from the beginning. But we get a very nice, neat kind of tying the bow on the series, because we come back to the hunting imagery when it comes to Christmas at Sandringham, and everyone arrives and they're like hanging all these pheasants up by like sticking their heads on spikes with like
Lots
squelch
of
noises.
Noisy squelching. And we see Diana trying to get Mama alone once more, being brushed aside. The Queen saying the dogs need feeding.
Oh
So if you don't
God.
mind, we'll have to find another time. Charles also tries to get the Queen alone, and the Queen is like, why am I being ambushed by everyone? Like, can't even bear to talk to her own kid. She's like, let's do this like privy councillors on our feet to keep it brief, which is like a shocking moment.
Yeah, what
even
a
after all we've
bitch.
seen, that still has the capacity to shock.
Once again, we get Charles talking about how much he's suffering, and the Queen says, you're not suffering, we're all suffering looking at you. Not a single breathing soul thinks you're suffering.
Yeah, and she's telling him they need to pull themselves together and stop making spectacles of themselves.
I was very pleased that Tobias Menzies got to do something before the season ended. And we got this really great scene of him coming into Diana's room.
Yeah, because we see him in Sandringham. He's the only one who's there to greet her when she arrives with Will and Harry. And he's the only one that says hello to the kids.
Yeah.
Charles goes inside. But as this Christmas party is going on downstairs, Diana is upstairs in her room, sulking in her jeans. And Philip comes in and is sort of trying to be jovial. He's saying, oh, we can be a rough bunch in this family, and I'm sure on occasion to a creature like you, it must feel, well, what does it feel like?
And it's shocking because I feel like no other member of the royal family has actually asked Diana this kind of question before.
But when she says a cold, frozen tundra, he's like, right, like that then. That was funny.
Yeah.
But he is again stupidly confident that things are going to work out. And he's saying Charles will come around when he realises he can never have the other one. And he says to Diana, would it help you to realise we all think he's quite mad? Like, this man,
It's so
where is he
clueless.
getting this from?
Yeah, he seems like very delusional, I guess, because he's used to being in a marriage where he's like fucked around loads and they've made it work because I guess the Queen is literally the Queen and can't do anything else.
Well, she could have.
Well, yeah. But Diana says, if this family can't give me the love and security I deserve, I have no choice but to break away.
To which we get this phenomenal ending to the series where he says he can't see that ending well for her. And she says, is that a threat, sir? Oh my
Chills.
God. Is Peter Morgan a Diana death truther?
I am obsessed. And now we know what the next 2 seasons are going to be about. It's going to be about Philip plotting the death of Diana. I am obviously joking. I'm sure he's not going to say that at all.
But it did make us gasp.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very excited.
Philip's big line then, after that sort of ominous threat, is when he tells Diana, everyone in this system is a lost, lonely, irrelevant outsider. Apart from the one person, the only person that matters. She is the oxygen we all breathe, the essence of all our duty. Your problem, if I may say, is you seem to be confused about who that person is. Boom.
Wow. Yeah. A mic drop from Philip there.
And then we get the final scene of Diana coming down the stairs, pausing in front of the antlers hung up on the wall. She is the stag, the prize stag that they tried to hang on the wall, but she continues walking. And then they have the family portrait and a close-up on Diana as it fades to black.
So what did you think?
Of the whole season?
Yeah.
I loved it, Tom. I thought this was the best season so far.
Yeah, it was definitely like very entertaining. And I did have slightly more of those kind of thoughts of, is this historically accurate than I did maybe in previous seasons because of the
I
Thatcher
didn't.
of it all. I was just kind of more aware of it, I suppose, but I didn't let it get in the way of like how entertaining this season was and how good so many of the performances were.
I know. It was so enjoyable. And even though the whole time I was just like squealing and like, oh my God, this is so good. At the same time, you were thinking like, wow, this is doing something very different from the previous seasons.
Yeah.
Because before we have felt like, is this royalist propaganda, whereas I don't think this season could be categorized as that, even though there were moments that certainly made us raise our eyebrows and think, okay, right, the Queen is like secretly this fount of empathy.
Yeah.
Or this closet lefty that campaigns against right-wing politicians.
Yeah, I think Peter Morgan is as attached as ever to the monarchy, but he really turns on the individuals a lot more in this season than he has before.
But the things that are going to come in the next couple of seasons are so indefensible that I wonder, were the first 3 seasons building them up to then take them down for the second half of the series? And I'm fascinated with what is going to happen with Diana. I wonder if in the next season we're going to see more of her plotting and her media savvy and her guile.
Yeah.
And how she cooperated with the press on occasion and things like that. Are we going to get into that side of her?
I hope so, yeah. I think that's really interesting.
I also wonder how that Prince Andrew stuff is going to be covered. I felt like the scenes showing the tension between him and Charles were a precursor to more blowouts next season.
Yeah.
I do think because we've got such heavyweights playing Prince Philip and Princess Margaret in the form of Jonathan Pryce and Leslie Manville, they're going to want plenty for them to do. So I'm hoping that we'll have some of the conflict between Prince Philip and Fergie represented. That would be a real treat for us, I think. I will demand the toe sucking is part of it. We must not leave out the toe sucking.
Yeah, it'd be so disappointing if they get rid of that.
Tampon Gate would be another moment I'd love to see, although I can't imagine how this show would handle that. I would be thrilled to find out.
Absolutely. I think like Peter Morgan's done such a good job of leaving us wanting more of the story.
What agony for us to have to wait 2 years. If you loved Tobias Menzies on this season like I did and Tom did, you should check out this other show he's on called This Way Up with Aisling B and Sharon Horgan, 2 fabulous Irish comedians, that has a lot of Tobias Menzies. I think next week we are going to try and get to grips with everything that's been going on with the Martin Bashir panorama, BBC investigation that has been unfolding over the last few weeks, and that will presumably unfold on The Crown next season or the following season.
And generally, I think next week we're going to do a bit of a recap of stuff we might have missed over the last couple of weeks while we've been watching The Crown.
Until next week, thank you so much for listening. Please let us know what you thought of this season of The Crown. What were your favourite moments? What are you hoping to see next season?
What do you think they missed? Is there anything that they didn't do that you wanted to see? In the meantime, take care, stay safe. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.
Look, our time is up. How it flies.